Silksong has now been out in the wild for a few days now. I'm currently in Act 2 myself, feeling pretty confident that I can take on anything that this game can reasonably throw at me now. Yet all I can see online is people complaining that the game is just too hard. It's unforgiving, and doesn't give the player enough resources to face the threats ahead. This entire situation has now brought up the age-old question of whether video games collectively are getting too hard these days, or is there something more to it? And as someone who lives and breathes stuff like Souls-likes, I have a lot to say on this subject. I will fully admit, Silksong is harder in its early game compared to its mid game. I currently do have my needle upgraded twice, and the damage that I can now dish out compared to the beginning, yeah, it's night and day in difference. Most enemies live maybe 2 or 3 hits tops, and with the setups that I'm using, it makes the game even easier in my opinion. But the level of difficulty has resulted in nerfs being done to the game already, as PC Gamer reports here. Upcoming Silksong patch will make the early game easier and the mid game cheaper. Yep, it's already happened, the complaining has broken through, and Team Cherry has now nerfed the early game, or I guess will soon anyways, because far too many players are struggling. Some of the nerfs include reducing the damage of bosses like Sister Splinter, which is this big monster that slams down on you from above with its claws, calls in adds, and shoots vines across the boss arena that you can cut down yourself. It took me personally 2 tries to get Sister Splinter down. Nothing she did was particularly hard to deal with, but I mostly just failed my first attempt because I got too overconfident like usual. Then the other boss, which is Morwing, is interesting, because if I recall, you just stay close to that guy. He's sort of like the Taurus demon in Dark Souls. They just look scary, but they really aren't. The Sandcarver enemies in the Blasted Steppes are also having their damage reduced to 1 mask instead of 2. And things like rosary prices will also be reduced across the board, amongst other changes, like increases in rosaries gained when completing quests and whatnot too, effectively meaning that Team Cherry is increasing the overall economy of the game, and making it easier to both get stronger and beat things, which is a positive for people who maybe aren't used to Hollow Knight or Souls-like combat in general. But this still won't fix the game's much harder enemy boss fights later on. I personally found the boss at the end of Act 1 to be the hardest so far. I won't say the name or describe the fight, so don't worry, but I can see that fight specifically is probably going to give people a lot of headaches. The only change I wish was that the game's platinum trophy didn't have stupid things like beat the whole game in under 5 hours, or the other trophy where you have to beat the game in under 30 hours while also 100%ing the entire game, because, oh man, who knows, maybe I can do that. I'm currently 18 hours into the game myself, but since the game really has no way that I'm aware of anyways, to tell me exactly how much percentage-wise I am, I'm probably not going to get that one done either. But this does, like I said, spark the debate again if games are simply too hard these days for their own good, and that the difficulty of Silksong is widespread, as Games Radar reports here. Silksong is way harder than Hollow Knight, and my theory is that Team Cherry became evil masterminds without even realizing it, and then Games Radar opens their article with this. Way back in 2020, Team Cherry reckoned Hollow Knight Silksong would sit alongside Hollow Knight in difficulty. Eric Gibson and William Pellin told Edge magazine that it could be anyone's first Hollow Knight game, and that they didn't go out of their way to ramp up the difficulty. I have been pondering Gibson and Pellin's words each time Silksong has pummeled me into Hornet Mash without even having the good grace to blink. The journalist also makes a statement in their article that they also beat the first Hollow Knight game, and even got the game to 112% achievement, which while doing also the gauntlet of bosses themselves. And that even with all of that game knowledge, Silksong is apparently still destroying them. The major contention here is that Silksong regularly has enemies hitting you for 2 masks of health per hit, which when you start the game, you only have about 5 masks, so it doesn't leave much room for error, although when you heal, you get 3 whole masks back, which I think makes this a lot easier in my opinion. But I will admit that the whole mask economy, if you will, to increasing your health is still very limited, or maybe I'm just missing a ton of masks myself, but where I am in the game, I have increased my mask health a total of 1 time so far anyways. Meaning that I've been playing most of the game with like 6 masks or something myself. I almost have another mask upgrade. I need a single piece of the mask shard to get it, but the fact that I've played the majority of the game so far with barely any health upgrades is definitely a problem, I will admit. But in general, I do agree that Silksong doesn't really dish out full upgrades nearly enough. It would be nice if more mask shards were maybe just available to buy, or if you could just find full-blown mask upgrades in the wild more often. But I guess it's more than that, because in case you haven't played Hollow Knight, as in the first game I mean, it rarely has enemies doing anything more than 1 mask of damage per hit. And outside of rare circumstances where a boss hits you with like a crazy move or something that does 2 damage, it doesn't really happen. And if you enjoy the content, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thank you very much. But the majority of the game is single mask hits. And then in Silksong, regular enemies can smack you around like crazy and take 2 and sometimes even 3 masks of damage. But that's only if you're not quick enough to then get away. And I understand why people who maybe aren't used to games like this are either going to be walking away or just complaining online, which has now led to the whole difficulty reductions that we're seeing now. It then makes me wonder if games in general are just getting too hard for people. I mean, it's no surprise that games like Dark Souls have generally been a massive influence on game difficulty across everything, as well as the increase in bosses and such being more unforgiving than before, and many games have replicated these features themselves. Hollow Knight and Silksong, for example, wouldn't even exist the way that they do if Dark Souls, or I guess I should say Demon Souls, didn't exist first and influence things the ways that they have. I mean, difficulty is a big talking point in games as well. People are constantly saying if you cheat by using all the safety nets in whatever game that you didn't actually beat whatever game they're talking about. For example, in Elden Ring, personally, I think that game kind of ruined the concept of boss difficulty for many games even more than Demon or Dark Souls did. Elden Ring's early to even late game sort of, I found most of the things I fought to be in line with itself and that the difficulty curve felt very gradual. But once you hit the late game where you fight things like Placidu Sax, or I guess Millennia even, it was obvious that From Software was starting to lose the plot in my opinion. Elden Ring in general has bosses aplenty that have very long combo strings, where it feels almost as if you're watching them do entire sequences before you can even reasonably attack yourself. Another game that took that Elden Ring difficulty and made its whole game feel like that late game of Elden Ring was actually the first Berserker Kazan, which came out this year. I platinumed Kazan, just like I did Elden Ring and all the other Souls-like games that I've played. I beat Kazan in my first playthrough somehow on its standard difficulty with 0 summoning, and trust me when I tell you that Kazan, that game was brutal with how hard it was compared to anything like Silksong. But personally, I didn't find Kazan's difficulty to be all that enjoyable, and most often at times I found how hard it was to maybe be more of a detriment to the experience than anything else. I mean, sure, the game does have an easy mode, so maybe all the points I just made are kind of moot, but I also wanted to prove myself and be a masochist, so I never really used it. But that being said, a first playthrough of Kazan on normal with 0 summoning help, yeah, it's pretty insane. Let's just say that. But as seen here from Game Rant, Kazan didn't meet sales expectations, although the game is still considered a success, because it still introduced the dungeon and fighter IP, which Kazan is a part of, to a global audience. However, its steep difficulty curve was clearly a big reason why the casual fanbase out there who buys games steered clear of this game. Likely, even its easy mode would still be too hard for them, and with Silksong now getting pulled into this conversation, it confirms what I was thinking when it comes to games like this, which is that unfortunately for many, not everyone of course, but many, that games are simply becoming too hard. Or maybe players are just becoming too, I don't know, babied maybe? Personally, I don't think Silksong should have been nerfed in any which way myself. At best, they could just maybe increase the rosary gains, but decreasing how hard enemies hit or whatnot, again, you heal 3 every time you heal. But personally, I don't think Team Cherry should have changed anything, because Silksong is meant to be a game where you move fast, hit hard, and react quickly. Plus, it's not like the game doesn't have the tools at the ready to deal with any threats around you. For example, the game has a crest system. You start off with one. The crests are the builds that you place your little tools into, like the pin to show yourself on the map. That's your crest system. Anyway, the first crest you get, it makes the game play like Hornet would. You know, fast, longer range attacks, and you dive at a 45-degree angle. However, you can find other crests in the early game. For example, there's one called the Wanderer crest. Don't worry, I won't show it in this video because people don't want spoilers, I get that, but all I'll say is that the Wanderer crest makes Hornet attack in shorter, more precise strikes and changes, and this is key, her dive mechanic back to how the first Hollow Knight game plays pretty much. So if you're struggling with Hornet's dive mechanic, the Wanderer crest is going to make the game considerably easier to play if you ask me. And again, you can find it in the early game if you want to, and there's other ones too. There's even a Reaper crest, where you do slower attacks, but you gain more silk per hit from enemies so that you can dish out abilities more often and heal. I also found a Berserker crest, where your silk heal is then replaced by a rage mechanic instead, where Hornet then enters a berserk state, and then for a short time, every time she hits an enemy, she actually heals a full mask. I mean, it's meant for offensive play, obviously. But the crest system, in my opinion, that greatly already changes how the overall game feels to play. And it's not only that the actual tool slots allow you to also gain many things in the early game too. You have like moss items that you can get early on that give you a bump in silk every time you're hit so that you can heal more often. Or even the bell tool that you can find early on that places a protective barrier around Hornet when she heals so that if you do get hit, yeah, you'll lose your heal, but you'll also lose no additional health. And the bell will just shatter. And then you can repeat this as many times as you want and keep yourself alive. And then in Act 2, you can eventually get a tool that surrounds Hornet with a flash of energy. So when she heals, if any enemy is near you, they take actually pretty good damage. I've actually cleared out entire rooms using this heal tool combo alone, but personally, as cringe as it sounds, the best defense in Silksong is very much just a good offense, but I think that too many people are playing Silksong like they would Hollow Knight when Hornet is clearly not like the Knight. She's more of a dragoon from Final Fantasy, if you will, where the knight plays more like, well, a knight, I guess. Hornet is canonically also not as sturdy as the knight, which is why she takes more damage, but she also hits way harder too. And you can even critical hit enemies with Hornet, which leads to big damage as well. It's a welcome change, because if Silksong played too much like the first game, then it wouldn't feel fresh or new. But it's clear that the general gaming audience isn't happy with this either way. Understandably, a lot of people have jumped into Silksong without having played Hollow Knight before, and they're getting beaten into the pavement. And that this influx of new players has clearly forced what was once a community of players who rallied around the concept of Team Cherry's design to now wanting it to be easier due to the increased spotlight on Hollow Knight as a franchise this time around. For example, as seen here from Insider Gaming, Silksong has reached 5 million players in just 3 days since release. That's quite insane, but it says players because the game was also released day 1 on Game Pass. But in total, about 3 million in actual sales came from Steam alone, which is absolutely insane. And about 1 million players were on Game Pass that tried the game too. That being said, when you compare the original release of Hollow Knight, which came out as an absolute unknown, the integrity, and for lack of a better word, the purity of its gaming experience was then kept intact. But inevitably, when games do become popular and release like this, like with Silksong becoming just so hyped, naturally people unaware of what makes these kind of games, really great will then check them out. And then they'll usually be met with experiences they can't handle because they're not really used to what it offers. However, in my opinion, the wrong answer is to dilute the experience to accommodate the newer players, because think of the company and the game as if they're selling a drink that they're known for. If everyone loves that drink and its flavor, but then a bunch of new people complain that it's just, too strong to drink themselves, then by diluting the flavor, you'll just end up annoying the fans who were there day 1. After all, a game made for everyone is a game made for no one, as they say. Now, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, and Silksong being reduced in difficulty here is not that big of a deal. But I do think this does prove that maybe the difficulty ceiling when it comes to what games can reasonably reach is finally hitting a realistic breaking point too. PC Gamer, for example, had this article titled, "Silksong players are wrestling with the game stabs you and kicks you for crying about its difficulty." They then cite this Reddit post where a user posted this, which says, "My wife has been waiting for years for Silksong to come out, and the difficulty is making her quit for good." Here's more of what they said. "My wife is a massive Hollow Knight fan and has been waiting for Silksong to come out for years. She is not the most skilled of players, but she was able to complete Hollow Knight and enjoy her time. Silksong instead is breaking her apart. She has spent 3 days fighting Morwing without beating it, and she's dropping the game for good. I hope she'll pick it back up sometime, but it's sad to see all of the anticipation die out like this. I am loving the game and I'm having a blast with it, but I have come to the realization that this game is extremely punishing to lower skilled players who still make up a sizable share of the fan base. I don't believe that this guy's wife beat Hollow Knight if she's having this much trouble with a basic enemy type that's entire moveset is just swing slowly and jumps like Morwing does. It would make more sense to me if his wife was struggling on, say, the Act 1's final boss, maybe then, because that's an actually challenging fight. But if you beat Hollow Knight and you can't beat Morwing here, the math is simply just not really mathing to me. The same Redditor then says this: I think that this disconnect is very concerning and explains why so many people are complaining about the game's difficulty. It feels like Team Cherry doesn't understand that much of the appeal of Hollow Knight wasn't the challenge it offered, but also the lore, the exploration, and building crafting, and so on. These are all aspects of Silksong that are effectively gatekept by an arbitrary difficulty barrier. I have seen many people here on Reddit saying to get good, but don't think that discourse about the game's difficulty should be hand-waved so easily. If nothing about it is done, I think that a lot of casual fans will be inevitably estranged from the game. I can see the point that he's making, but personally, it's not the game's fault that the players are unable to adapt, if you ask me. I do think that diluting the purity of an experience to adhere to what casuals want has never really worked for these sorts of games either. I think the only time casual fans being catered to makes sense is if your game is, let's say, live service. That their continued engagement is paramount to the overall longevity of the game. Obviously, if your game is live service, you do kind of need players to keep coming back and playing the game to spend more money on it and so on. However, Silksong is not that sort of game. It's a single player game. It's not really tied to some battle pass or live service. It doesn't need players engaging constantly to boost some arbitrary number. It's also an indie game. And I do think complaining that an indie game must change its design philosophy so people can complete it more goes against what that game should be about. The Redditor did say that Hollow Knight's community is more than its difficulty, sure, but I mean, that does ring true for any fan base. The Elden Ring, or I guess Soulsborne fan base largely by association, are like that too. Those games are more than their difficulty as well. They're also about exploration, lore, and so on. However, what these sorts of players fail to understand is that what makes a game like Dark Souls or Silksong unique and important is that its difficulty is baked into the experience. It's meant to invoke the feeling of you surpassing this challenge to see what's on the other side, the euphoric release of, oh my god, I just did that. I actually just beat that thing. That drives the overall experience. Without the possibility of difficulty or adversary, there really is no growth, if you will, within the experience. Think about it, right? Look back at when you first played a game that was difficult to you. Maybe it was Super Mario, Zelda, or more recently, Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Now be real with yourselves. Would a game like Dark Souls or even Elden Ring be better if it was suddenly super easy? Like you could just press a button in the settings and make everything hit for 80% less damage or something? It wouldn't, right? That allure and drive of playing something like a Dark Souls game was that you were surviving these impossible-esque fights and scenarios at first glance anyways. But when you did finally beat that boss and then you reached that next section, it was a moment of real tangible excitement and wonder. Like, what awaits me beyond this monster I just ended? What secrets will I find? What revelations can I uncover? Without that sense of dread, of difficulty, those answers, those discoveries, they lose their meaning and reason for being, if you ask me. Sure, some games are crazy hard like Kazan, as I said before, but nothing released these days is anywhere near Kazan levels of hard. But even then, with beating Kazan myself with zero help, that is still an achievement all of its own to me, and it made me better as a player. It made me, in a real-life sense, level up, so to speak. I became a better person for having beaten Kazan and overcoming its many harrowing changes. I tend to then think of how I viewed and played games before and after I played something like Demon Souls for the first time too. Before, difficulty was kind of negligible. It could be managed through maybe grinding levels in a game or just turning it down in the menu through the settings, but with Demon Souls, it was one of the first times that I played a game where I was given absolutely zero chance at overcoming something unless I, as a player, committed myself to its systems. And once I beat Demon Souls, I genuinely believe that it did change my brain chemistry. And with Dark Souls 1 through 3, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, oh man, Sekiro even, that was a tough game for sure. My abilities just increased, as did many of you who played those games too. So the player that I am now, like you guys versus then, it's just like two different people pretty much. And personally, this may sound cringe, but hear me out, but beating difficult games also changes how I personally viewed life and the problems that are in front of me. Because these sorts of games teach you that failure is a lesson to learn from instead of what easy games do. which is that failure is just a nuisance with nothing really to gain from. And that is the key here if you ask me. The people complaining that Silksong is too hard are likely players who don't view failure as something that they can learn from themselves. They instead just view failure as being unfair or annoying, which means that these sorts of players do not learn from their mistakes, but instead just seek to just make their lives easier through manipulation in order to succeed. But by both playing games and living life this way, you don't really grow as a person. You just become more impatient and frankly baby-like if you ask me. By crying that Silksong is too hard instead of engaging with its many systems and adapting to them, you're telling your brain that you're not good enough or unable to adapt to new scenarios or concepts. You're actually limiting yourself in how you can grow as a person and as someone who plays video games, which is why I think that Team Cherry and what they have done here, it kind of just dilutes the experience that they've created. And they're instead souring the drinks that they're known for because a bunch of babies can't really stomach the taste. But again, if Silksong continues nerfing itself, eventually it becomes a game for no one but the people who don't want to push themselves. And at that point, games like this lose that purity and identity that they work so hard to refine in the first place. PC Gamer also recites one user on Reddit who said this: "Bad rosary economy, insane difficulty scaling, very few meaningful unlocks and upgrades, runbacks, locked into fighting bosses, contact damage stacking with normal hits, etc." Yeah, it sounds like you're playing Hollow Knight Silksong and not Call of Duty to me, which is a good thing, plus most of the issues listed there are skill issues. Bad rosary economy, not at all. The game has plenty of easy to grind spots for rosaries from the early game as well. You can even use stations to turn your rosaries into beads which just stay on your character even if you die. But you lose 20% of the rosaries you have when you put them into those bead necklaces, I hear some say. Okay, so what? What's the different solution then? The better solution is either, you lose a bit to keep most of it safe, or the alternative is you die with all of your rosary beads, and then you crash out on Reddit saying that the game is too hard and that you're a baby? Like, here's the thing, okay? There are solutions to these problems. The problem is that these people are too lazy or maybe unwilling to simply seek out the solutions, and then they want these games to just, I don't know how to say it other than baby them instead. Insane difficulty scaling, that's a bit much too. It's not that bad of a game, you just need practice, and very few meaningful unlocks is kind of a lie too. The crests change everything, the upgrades can protect you aplenty, and for God's sakes you can heal in mid-air, which is crazy broken too. Runbacks is a bad faith argument, there's benches near most boss fights, or they have shortcuts even. It's just that you need to explore the game and use your eyes more, which clearly these people are not doing, and locked into fighting bosses is a non-issue. You're locked into boss fights in pretty much any game these days. That has been the standard forever, and taking damage from contact, have you played video games before? Hollow Knight has had this as well. Super Mario all the way back in the 80s had this mechanic too. You're complaining about something that has always been there in games. It just sounds like to me that these people are just, like I said, unwilling to adapt to new scenarios, and that they are instead frustrated that their unwillingness to grow as players is just not being catered to. It's like horror games, you know? So many AAA horror games are barely even scary anymore. Because if they're too scary, people will drop them and run away crying, so instead most AAA horror games are just creepy environments with weird enemies. But then the actual scares are kept to a bare minimum, which defeats the purpose of the game being labeled as a horror game in the first place. Silksong doesn't need to change, it's frankly the players that need to instead, and like I said, once you hit Act 2, especially when you find more oil for your needle, the game becomes considerably easier. So sure, the early to mid game is a tad more difficult, but you just need to learn how the game works. Don't hit everything from the ground. Jump more often. Dragoon jump down on your enemies and hit them in the head. Most big enemies that hit hard are honestly completely powerless to the Dragoon jump anyways. You can bounce on most enemies' heads anyways, and just deal massive damage while staying safe yourself. You can also technically parry most, not all, but most attacks by simply attacking the enemy the same time they attack you. You can even parry and shoot back projectiles that are thrown your way. You can even mash to multi-parry enemies who hit you a bunch too. But it's too hard, they say. Then learn, for God's sake. Stop being babies about literally everything. Is this how people live their lives these days? Does everything need to be spelled out for them? Everything labeled, every corner of every table sanded off so you don't hurt your heads? Like, when did so many people just oust themselves as adult babies like this? The game isn't hard. You're just unwilling to apply yourself to things because you're used to things just working without any input from you. Like this article from Kotaku where people are complaining that the platforming is too hard. Again, go online if you're already able to and just go and watch a video and go look up how to find the Crest of the Wanderer first. It's in the early game, so you have zero excuses on not being able to find it. So get that crest, equip it immediately, and now all your platforming is brain dead easy. And even then, all you have to do is pull your analog stick to the bottom right on the angle to bounce on something or bottom left, and you can make it even easier for yourself too. If platforming is too hard at first in between bouncing, try to double tap X to make Hornet inflate her dress to float. Then slowly come down to the next point to bounce, aim, bounce, and then double tap to inflate again, aim, bounce, voila, you just did it. And if you don't have Hornet's dress inflating ability, again, you can get that very, very early on in the game. Just look it up if you somehow haven't gotten it already, and you'll be fine. I swear, 90% of these problems would be fixed if people just explored the game more and stopped running into the same wall they keep dying at. The game is a Metroidvania. It means you don't need to just go down one path all the time. If one path is blocking you, go search for others. It's like someone complaining how the Tree Sentinel keeps ending them in Elden Ring at the beginning. Like, maybe stop running into the Tree Sentinel and go south down the lands between. You'll find easier enemies, you'll level up and whatnot, you'll find new gear, and then eventually when you get back, you'll just beat the Tree Sentinel no problem. These games, whether it's Elden Ring or Silksong and more, you have options, people. Kazan, this is not. You can even find other items and areas and easier bosses to fight first. You can find upgrades, you can grind rosaries in many locations and buy upgrades. You don't just need to be doing this stuff and being impatient and unwilling to commit yourself to something. You lack patience. I guess I could just summarize this whole video as get good, but in actuality, I don't want to sound like some elitist to you guys. I know you guys can do this, you just got to apply yourselves. Practice your jumps on easier enemies, read enemy movements, know that you can't or should attack 24/7, wait for openings, find upgrades, find new crests and tools, and you can do this, I believe in you. Because again, for the thousandth time, a game made for everyone is a game made for no one, and Silksong is not meant to be for everyone. But by demanding it to be, you're losing out on an experience that is arguably one of the most pure in its form to ever be released, so please enjoy it. But what do you think? Is Silksong too hard, not hard enough? Should Team Cherry listen to the casual crowd? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, subscribe, pain makes character, remember that, and I'll see you next time.